Well, hello, everybody. I am glad that you are here and watching this, and I'm hopeful that it comes across in a way that is impactful, despite us trying it in a format that is not what would be probably my first preference. I have expressed already that I feel like this is an important topic and valuable, and I hope that you will feel the same when we're done. So, let's get started. First off, there we go. Now I got it moving. I'm going to be utilizing for a portion of this discussion the idea of the iceberg model of wellness. So we're going to build it up step by step and stage by stage. But one of the things I'd like to do is that when we talk about icebergs, and I'm never going to measure this to go find out because it is just a terrible idea that I find. But icebergs supposedly only 10% of the actual ice is what's visible above the water, meaning that there's 90% of the stuff that's below visibility. It's below the water, you can't see it. Um, so, in that sense of what's visible and what's not visible, the things that we do in our lives, the actions that we take, the choices that we make, in this case, it's labeled the state of your health. The things that I could see about you and you could see about me, those are only like 10% of our overall health or our overall wellness is the label for this particular. So I think it's also valuable to highlight this illustration intentionally uses a pyramid type shape to try and illustrate some concepts as well. So at the very bottom, at the very foundation, is, according to this model, the spiritual or the meaning realm, which I think of as your faith, sort of the foundation for your life. In this space, this is one of the areas that I'm hopeful that I prompt you to think about a little bit, um, and that you will choose to, across time, continue to think about and across your life, because what creates meaning and what is important to you can shift and can adjust and probably should as we continue to gain experience and we just grow in our own lives. But if we're not thoughtful about it, I just don't think that we're aware of some of the changes in our own values, or we don't question why those values are there. So I see this level as being the foundation for your life, the being clear to yourself about what do you value and what do you covet, what do you think is right versus wrong, what do you think is worthwhile, and what are the things that you think are just not worth it. What's worthy of you try working to invest your time and your money and your effort and your energy into. Culture certainly has strong messages. They're going to constantly try to encourage you towards spending your money and your attention and your energy and your time in certain ways. And your faith may be aligning with that, or it may also be creating tensions within that. So being clear for yourself of what you value, I think is really, really helpful and important. This we're going to leave alone. That's time that I led class, but I would have been asking you what are four things, their concepts or truths or whatever that you just value most. So this is a piece that will probably show up in your form. I think a valuable way to try and use your values is to see them as the lenses that you see all of life through. What you see as being important and what you think is just not that important influences the way you interpret everything that happens around you. So, for example, 2 Corinthians 4:18 is an important one to me. It says, "Don't look at the troubles that you can see right now. Rather, look forward to what you have not yet seen. For the troubles you see will soon be over, but the joys to come will last forever." So, I work this is something that's universally correct. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, but I work to try and see my troubles not as catastrophes, but as just temporary. And through that, then, even when big challenges arise, and I'm not going to say it's like a perfect, wonderful sliding down the rainbow in a unicorn kind of experience, but it gives me a perspective on which to look at troubles and look at challenges and look at pain, at conflict. Um, if my values were in a different space or my faith was in a different space, I might look at those things in a different way. So if we move up this pyramid, we've got our base, we've got the foundation for our life. Within that model, the iceberg model of wellness, the next stage is what is it that creates your motivations? So I think when we look at what we value, that knowing what you value should influence what motivates you. So what are you going to invest your time and money and energy and all of those things? What really makes you feel fulfilled? What is it that motivates you to feel fulfilled? A common way I think that we sort of express that in current culture is that idea of what are you filling your cup with? So from that, I think Ephesians is another helpful piece. It Ephesians 2:4 says, judge, well, this is a paraphrase of Ephesians 2:4 through 10. It says, judge your worth and value by what God says about you in his word, not by how somebody else treats you. And I think that that's another, again, because it is part of my faith, forms the way that I approach and interpret different situations. So for me, I think the people that you surround yourself with, that we give the power of trust to, those people that we trust can really either encourage and support us or really demoralize and entice us towards actions that we don't really value. So I think it's really helpful to be thinking about what is it that motivates you? And what are the people around you? Who are you giving power and authority to and trust to? How are they and their value influencing the way that you live? The next stage out of this pyramid, we're still below the waterline, right? Like I can't look at you and see clearly what your values are. I can't look at you and know what motivates you or who the people that you surround yourself with are. I can't look at you and necessarily understand everything about your lifestyle or what behaviors and actions you invest into. So this is the next level, that lifestyle or behavioral level. This is really just how do you live your life? Your daily actions, your habits, the choices that come day in and day out that many times just have become habit for us are really based off of what motivates us. And ideally, what motivates us is really based off of what we value, what we find meaning in. So all of that then leads to this complete illustration where ultimately all those factors influence how healthy you are, your state of health. And some of those things are visible, but many of those things in our lives are really just not very visible. A challenge arises, I think, when we identify something that we articulate as being a value and maybe we very deeply feel as a value, but it doesn't seem to translate into how we actually choose to live our life and interact with other people and support the rest of the community. So it's that space that I'm hopeful that just by giving you some time or some space to think about it, you in self-reflection just do what's right for you. I'm not here to tell you what's right for you. I want you to be looking to your own values. what you feel like you should be doing and how you feel like you should be interpreting the challenges and the victories and the mundaneness of day-to-day life. So, I would, if we were in class, be asking you what's something that you'd like to, based off of your own values, what was something that you would like to continue to build or something that you'd like to maintain. That's just going to end up being left as for something to you, for something for you to just contemplate. I'm not going to ask you to share that out in a public space. So, if we're talking about spirituality, which is not the same thing as religion, but at least has some parallels with religion, I wanted to bring forward just a little bit of information around the influence of religion and how much influence is religion having around people's day-to-day choices and their interactions and even their happiness to some extent, as far as I could find data or information on it. So I hope that you recognize spirituality as being broader than the concept or the label of just religion. But this is the way most of the data that I can find is housed, is within the language of religion. So here we go. Most of this is from Pew Research. The data you can see here plotted out is over 20 years worth of information. You can see in the early 2000s that about 50%, a little over 50% of Americans said at that point that religion was sort of losing its influence. And that seems kind of unfortunate that over half of the people at that time were thinking that religion was losing its influence on our day-to-day actions. But you can see that that's only grown, and that now the 2024 data says that 80%, 8 in 10 people think that religion is no longer influencing the way that we live our own lives and the decisions that we make and the actions that we take and the interactions and values. Um, this one is now showing that some of that data in a slightly different way. So we've already seen that there's this big perception that in religion's influence is declining. This is breaking that down into whether individuals see that as being a good thing or a bad thing. So that's why the data looks a little bit different here. As you look over to the left-hand side, these represent the people who have just a overall generally a positive view that religion is a good idea, is a good thing. That's still well over 50%. So more than half of us think that having religious values is a good idea. There's only about 20%, a little under 20%, that think that religion is actually not helpful or is not useful. And then there's another 20% or so who are just not really opinionated in either direction, thinking that religion's either good for a person or that religion's actually bad for a person. But of those people who do think that religion is a really positive thing, you can see that 49% of those individuals think it's really good, but it's actually declining. And that by declining, that's bad, that it's not influencing us. By not having this strong sense of religious faith, that it is having a negative influence on us. This particular one, let me see, I'm going to look at my own slide sheet here since my face is covering up. This one is again from Pew Research. Its label was that highly religious adults are more engaged with their family and more likely to volunteer and be happier overall. So that's what the title there that's slightly covered would be saying. So let's look at some of the data points or data plots that they've presented for us. So in those who do identify themselves, so you're self-identifying in this particular information, whether I feel like you are religious or not, people who did identify themselves as religious were more engaged with family. So we can see here this idea of gathering with their extended family at least monthly. that people who weren't really religious, that was less than a third of them, and about half of people who said that they were religious were actually gathering with their extended family at least once a month. This idea of happiness, that they're very happy with the things that, with the way that life's going, you can see a pretty clear distinction between those who identify themselves as not being really highly religious and those who are. And the same thing with satisfied for life. The disparity or the difference isn't quite as high, or with family life, very satisfied with family life isn't quite as high, but for each of these spaces, you see a greater appreciation for life, a greater sense of gratitude for those that identify themselves as being high religious. If we look at that back into the volunteerism piece that was part of the initial label, volunteering within the community or their community involvement, you can see that people who identified themselves as being high religious were engaged in volunteering and were engaged in donating and giving uh, to other members or less fortunate members of the community. So I think in each of those spaces, you see, I interpret at least, values being put into action and having those values shaping the way that you choose to live day to day and act day to day. So this one is titled Highly Religious Adults Are Not Distinctive in Interpersonal Interactions or in their health or in their social consciousness. So what we value can have an influence on the way we live life, but it also can have areas where maybe it should, but is not necessarily influencing our day-to-day decisions. So on the left-hand side here, you can see they were looking at interpersonal relationships, and we have done some stuff around anger or losing your temper not within class, but within your promise scores, which you're going to be doing again this week. And we also looked at it much earlier in the semester. But here in this data, you can see that people who identified themselves as being high religious actually self-reported that they lost their temper a little bit more frequently, uh, or just about the exact same. I missaid that. Just about the same as those who were not highly religious. And as far as telling a white lie, there is some distinction here, but again, not a huge disparity in the results. So people who said they were highly religious weren't as likely or didn't report as frequently telling a white lie last week, but still pretty close. And that closeness becomes even more pronounced as we look at these ideas of, are they very satisfied with your own health? Didn't seem to make a huge difference, but depending on what your value system or how strong you felt like your value system was. Overweight in the past week, that was exactly the same, and pretty much exercising was exactly the same as well. So in some spaces, our values may not be influencing our day-to-day choices as much as they possibly could. This is again from the same body of research from Pew. This is just more data out of the poll that they completed. This illustration here is showing that belief in God, if they're trying to identify what it means to be a Christian, the number one thing, and this seems kind of interesting to me, that the percent of Christians who say an essential part of being a Christian is believing in God is only 86%. That means somewhere in there, there's 14% of people, 14% of Christians who say, it's not actually essential in Christianity to believe in God, which is a very strange thing for me to try to contemplate. I'm not sure how that distinction is made in their own mind. But as you look down, the next most important or most defining characteristic of what it means to be Christian is being grateful for what you have. Next is forgiving those who have wronged you, being honest at all times, and praying actually comes in below those, or praying regularly. I think as you look at the entire list, what you can see is some of those are clearly values and some of those are actions or behaviors. And I think that can kind of inform a little bit, or just have you think about where are your values and what are the behaviors that are driven out of those values? So I don't want to spend a ton of time on this one just because it makes for a busy screen here with all this data that's on there. You may be interested in just pausing the video and looking at any one of these a little bit longer. This is individuals who say, um, using the information about whether you identify a characteristic or a value or a trait as being central to Christianity, then they also looked at your behaviors. So are your values, which are on the left-hand side, driving your behaviors, which are on the right-hand side? So in this particular case, the first one that I looked at, that working to help the poor is essential to being is essential to being a Christian. If you said that that was true, then you can see that clearly that value had a pretty significant impact on the way that they chose to live their lives. They said that was really important, and 61% of people actually followed through on acting on whether they felt it was important or not. Uh, is is being honest always central to being Christian? Well, if you believed that, then you can see that it influenced the way that those individuals were acting or behaving. Oops, I'm so sorry. So you can look at some of these others. You can see some of them that might be of interest to you, or like these ones that look really even. Like this one looks at if you believe that living a healthy lifestyle is really essential to being a Christian. Did it influence the way that you live? Are you living a healthy lifestyle, at least as defined by exercising or not? And that turns out to be no. Might have said it was important, but that value didn't translate significantly into behavior. And I think that that's one of the things that's really, really, really possible for us as we continue to sort of live in a world that makes multiple versions of ourselves, that sometimes we are not authentic in every space. So we may be with other Christians, or we may be at church, or we may be in settings where we feel like we're representative of God or Christianity, and we will attest to certain things. And there'll be other spaces where we may feel like we're much more ingrained within a group or within peers or within friends or family or whatever, whose values are morphing away from or maybe completely anti antithetical to Christian values. Um, so I think it becomes a more possible for us to attest and to internally deeply believe that we are committed to certain values, but then our actions don't seem to speak to that well. And I don't know whether that's your space or not. I do feel like it is my space at times. So the more often I'm willing to consider that, I think the better I am at living out the way that I believe is important. So I think again, when I'm looking at troubles and challenges and difficulties and pain that exists, conflict that exists within my life, because those things do show up at times, um, or stress seems like it's there for all of us at times, that by having faith that places values on the way that I interact with other people and my understanding that this physical life is temporary, it gives me a way to view all of those things. It gives me a sense of resilience. And that's where I pulled this from. This is from research that was titled Faith, Resilience, and Everyday Experiences. And I like these two quotes, so I want to bring them forward to you. The first one says, resilience manifests itself in the day-to-day experiences and practices of individuals, and that faith can play a really important role in individuals' lives in overcoming and coping with the challenges of their daily stressors. I hope that what you believe and what you value gives you a sense of comfort and peacefulness when you are facing challenge. I know it doesn't immediately and instantaneously and always, or at least it doesn't for me, but I hope that that foundation is something that you can continue to return to develop a resiliency in the face of day-to-day life in a broken world. This next quote I picked out was from a gentleman named Salim, who is a Muslim, and he said, I do not always act upon my religion's requirements, but in my head, it defines me and it defines who I am, always at the back of my mind. It gives a sense of community, cohesion, belonging, and togetherness, and makes you feel you are not on your own in an environment which is hostile at times. I think for me personally, when I do something good, I know it would be rewarded. And I find a lot of beauty in that self-reflection and in that identity about how faith leads his experience in his life. I have also found this model of health that speaks to me. It also addresses some of the more recent and some of the ongoing topics we've hit upon in class. So in this, the four fitnesses, you can see here the foundations of health there around making sure you are pursuing physical health, mental health, spiritual health, and financial health. And that when those things are strong enough that you can continue to build out of that love and community and connection, and that you have the space and the freedom to pursue adventures and creativity and self-expression. And that through all of that, when each of these pieces are there, then you experience a level of significance and of importance and of purpose, I think is a good way to say that. So I like this illustration as well. It is easier for me to describe that iceberg model of wellness with its clear foundation of faith and values at the bottom. But this one is another one that may be informative to you and maybe a way that you'd like to look at sort of guiding your own life. Recently, you guys each did the acts of service lab, and I'm hopeful that as you completed that, it brought some kind of value to your day or your week. I am working on getting each of those graded or recorded, and I just hope that that investment had some kind of payoff for you, that it matched with your own values and didn't create extra strain, or at least not unbearable strain. The only other thing that I would like to bring up is this is a video link to a video, obviously, that is going to connect the idea of time management, which we've already looked at, and this iceberg model of wellness. So I think it's a really helpful way to just think about how you get immediate value out of a concept, how you can sort of immediately kind of apply the pieces and those kinds of things. So thanks for being with me. I hope that I presented something in a way that makes you thoughtful and self-reflective, and maybe more importantly than that, that just it creates, how to say this, that across your life that you're willing to come back to this question and just consider it at times. Because I think the more frequently you consider it and the more deeply you consider it, the more you will feel like the way that you live your life is attuned to the values you have for your life. And that's all. Thanks for being here.